Welcome, everyone, to the Canadian Baseball Network podcast. We're thrilled to have a familiar face back. MLB.com, Toronto Blue Jays reporter Keegan Matheson, live from Dunedin. How's it going, Keegan?
I'm doing well, fellas. I witnessed real baseball today. We finally got a little something to talk about, so happy to be
Yeah.
here.
That always makes the job a little easier.
It is, yeah. When there's no baseball, there's too much of me involved in my job. I need people to go out and play baseball to give me something to write about. When it's just me riffing, that's the danger zone. So it's been good. While we're talking now, we're a few days into the Grapefruit League schedule. By the time folks hear us, we'll be a little more into the middle, but there always comes a time right around now in camp where I think, oh my God, they play how many games of spring training? But I tell you, my God, it beats January. It sure does.
Well, this is awkward because I'm going to go back before the Grapefruit League games with my first question. We have to touch on it, the Vladimir Guerrero Jr.
Oh yeah.
situation, not reaching the extension by the, I guess, self-imposed deadline. I don't want to ask you if you were surprised or what comes from here, but what was that day like as far as being around camp with that kind of hanging over it?
It was very strange because it seemed to be affecting some people very much, and some people seemed like they weren't even aware it was happening. It's difficult to describe that energy. And when we got there that morning, it was 8 a.m. Vladdy was going to talk. We knew he'd be there early, so I was I was kind of just driving around the complex, like waiting for word of when Vladdy would speak. 8 a.m. And for people listening, just to have a visual, where we speak to players with the media backdrop, with the Blue Jays branding on it, is 15 or 20 feet outside the door of the clubhouse. So we go into the clubhouse to do one-on-one stuff, but Vladdy or anyone coming out for a big media day comes outside. And it's 8 o'clock in the morning. We still do not know what Vladdy's decision is. I think a lot of people drew a line at midnight or 9 p.m. the night prior, but it's a made-up deadline. It can be whenever you want. So we didn't know what Vladdy had decided walking out. He could have walked out and said, "Hey, I just signed a $500 million contract." Like, it was that strange. He walked out of the clubhouse. He was all smiles. He was hugging the security guards. And his interpreter, Hector LeBron, he goes by Tito. Tito wasn't there yet, so Vladdy was shouting across the complex and laughing and giving Tito a hard time for not being there yet. And I'm kind of looking out the side of my eye at other reporters like this guy's in a really good mood right now. Like, what's going on? Said hello to a couple of us coming in, big smile, as bright as you'll ever see Vladdy. And then when everything got started, that's when it got much more serious. And that's when Vladdy kind of flipped a switch to business Vladdy. And I think that's what's so strange about all of this, because people have known Vladdy since he was 16. Now, when Jose Bautista reached his points with contracts, yeah, it was tough for fans, but Bautista came to Toronto as a fully grown player who was 27, 28 years old, then broke out. Like, this is an example of a player who Blue Jays fans have only needed to know in a joyful context, in a strictly baseball context. Now, all of a sudden, this kid that everybody loved when he was 18, 19, 20, 24, suddenly this business part comes in and it shifts everything. And this is not the part of sports anybody enjoys from a fandom perspective. Yeah, you like it when you get the guy, but this is not why fans buy jerseys and to go to baseball games, is to hear about valuations and negotiations. So the tone of that day changed really quickly. When Ross Atkins spoke soon after, then Mark Shapiro, but the day just kind of went on. And a lot of times I think it's BS when I hear it's just business, we handle this side of it, but it kind of just was. The rest of the day went on. An hour later, Vladdy was taking BP in front of fans. It's kind of awkward. I think this whole year is going to be awkward.
When you said that it impacted some people more than others, are you talking about front office people? Are you talking about teammates?
Yeah, more front
Not to
office.
name specific names. I'm not going to have you throw Ross Atkins under the bus. He was crying in the corner.
It's okay. I don't know if I need to help with that, but it's Certainly the front office had a different tone because I think the front office understands the stakes of this. This is your homegrown, beloved superstar. It goes beyond baseball. This is not just about baseball. This is about 95% of fans are casual fans who like to turn on a game and do not care that Vladdy just hit a ball 114.9 miles per hour. They do not care that he has not hit a fastball that high in the zone since 2021 against blah, blah, blah. They don't care. They just love Vladdy because he's the name brand. He's the cool, fun, explosive, exciting player. He's a very viewer friendly player. There's nothing subtle about Vladdy's value. And I think the front office is recognizing that this isn't going well right now. They have internet access too, and as much as they try to stay away from coverage, I mean, everybody has a friend who's going to send them something. So they see it, certainly. And it's a difficult place for them too. And I don't mean difficult as in apologizing for them, but they're in a place now, which in some ways they put themselves, where Vladdy was completely within his right and probably smart to ask for a ton. Because if he doesn't get it, hey, bet on yourself, go out. If it doesn't go your way, Vladdy's not going to go broke. He'll be all right. But Vladdy, I think, has all of the power in this right now, and he knows that, and he's using it.
I guess I don't want to talk again. I don't want to talk too much about this, but we just had John Morosi on not long ago, and he mentioned not a comparison, but a similar situation in 2011 with the St. Louis Cardinals when Albert Pujols went to
Mhm.
spring training with no contract. Obviously went to the Angels after that, but they won the World Series in 2011. You said you think it's going to be awkward all year. Is this going to be a distraction? Because it seems like there's a lot of takes on that, whether it will actually be a distraction to the on-field product or if it's just going to be more so annoying.
I don't think it'll affect on field too much. I do think that there's an assumption that it will just go away as a narrative. And I mean, at a lot of games, like at road games, I'm one of two or three reporters there. At home games, there's not a ton more. It's going to get asked about because I'm going to ask about it. Like, it's that simple. And I certainly absolutely respect Vladdy's wishes to not, I'm not going to go up to him the next day and hammer him more and hammer him more. But there is a balance to that, that I try to strike with certain guys. Last year, for example, lower stakes, of course, but I'll use guys like Danny Jansen last year. I asked him about his contract in spring training, and I told him, listen, I'm not going to bother you every single day, but if it does come up in a relevant way later in the year, I will. But, I'm not going to hound you all year. With Vladdy, that line moves a bit because everything about Vladdy is tied to the future of this franchise. You can't just ignore that. I completely respect him setting a deadline in terms of negotiations, but it's not going to go away. And we are going to see it in every single road city. For example, when the Blue Jays go to New York, Vladdy gets absolutely hounded by everyone. There are not just New York reporters, but national reporters, many of whom live in New York, and a great deal of Latin media as well in New York. That's a really big home base for a lot of Latin media out of the Dominican, Venezuela. And Vladdy lines up and does a million interviews. And I will use the recent New York Post story by John Heyman as an example, where Vladdy said, yeah, like I'm open to all 30, blah, blah. I understand that Vladdy's getting ripped a little bit for that because, yeah, don't say you don't want to be a distraction and then go liking posts and saying that. You can't have it both ways. But a part of this that I guess I only see on my side in the media is that how questions are asked and when a guy's put on the spot kind of matters too. It's if you're going about your day and suddenly you have a microphone in your face saying, "Will you talk to all 30 teams and does that include New York?" Sometimes the easiest way out is just to be like, "Yeah, man, for sure, like all 30. Cool. All right, have a good night." And you go on with your day. So, it's a tough spot. It's only going to get more awkward. And it is going to be a field day for national US media who just want to tag Vladdy on random teams because people are going to click on that. That's what drives it, and it's going to be stupid.
Now that that's I don't want to say it's over because it's not going to be over for another 6 7 months, but
Release me.
now that that day is over, what are some other early stories you're kind of watching? I think back to you talk very highly of Alan Roden. Watched him today in the game against St. Louis. He looks like a big leaguer already to me. Just on the eye test. What are some of the other stories that you're looking at and trying to follow this spring?
Roden's definitely a big one. Because, oh my God, if Ross Atkins says a name instead of listing 20, that wakes me up. It just never happens. So that was a great answer by Ross Atkins. I should say I loved that answer, and I think that was smart of him to single out Alan Roden. Roden, I think, is wrongly cast as like a slap hitting on base guy. He's built like he is strong, strong, strong.
That's the first thing I noticed when you came to the plate was his physicality. I
He's
mean, it seems like he
jacked.
got bigger over last year.
And it doesn't necessarily play itself out as like it's not 50 home run power or anything like that. But when you talk about actual strength athletically, he is one of the strongest players in the entire organization. So he's a guy who can, if you're playing him every day, he can hit you 20. That's no problem. He has good enough MLB power and I think good enough defense. The thing that's jumped out to me a lot, and I typically don't care too much about this base running wise unless you're stealing bases, but he's one of the highest graded base runners in the entire organization. Like he does all these little things right that the Blue Jays love. And I think he just makes too much sense right now. The This decision is more about George Springer than anything else for me. Um, George Springer, I think, will bounce back a little bit from where he was last year, just naturally based on tendencies there. But pretty damn soon, and I think we're already at the point, Alan Roden's got to be part of this conversation. Orelvis Martinez, I don't put in that group just yet, but I think he's another example of that urgency this year. And I mean, the word urgency means nothing because every year everyone says they're urgent. But if this is Vladdy and Bo's last year, you better figure it out soon. And if Alan Roden's a better option than the next guy, play him. Orelvis Martinez is the example I use, and I wrote about this recently, just DHing him. He's not a good defender. Maybe he is in 2 or 3 years, but if he can DH for you and crush some lefties, I don't care about his development. Not right now, not this year. Get him in. Maybe that home run gets you that extra win, those extra 2 wins. These are I think, the fascinating conversations we'll have over the next few weeks. Are these fringe guys, prospects, mostly with Roden and Martinez? You'll see it a bit with maybe Addison Barger to a lesser extent, and Leo Jimenez don't have clearest paths. But if they're ready to raise your ceiling, play them. The Blue Jays have spent enough time with the floor. It hasn't gotten them anywhere. It's not exciting. It's not the most watchable baseball. But Roden, I think fans will love. He is smart as hell. He's really engaging, really great young guy. And Orelvis is that exciting upside guy. Like if they need one of them to pop, the Blue Jays need one hitter to pop. It's those two look like most likely.
I mean, say Martinez pops, obviously that would work if he DHs, but could there be a perception maybe from others in the front office or even fans that it's kind of a desperate move to DH him at 23 from a front office that's exactly that, being desperate, maybe hasn't done enough in other places in order to improve the
Yeah.
team?
They just need some good PR branding for that one. They need to brand it as aggression instead of desperation, maybe. But I'm big on that train that they should try to DH Orelvis. And if he can eventually play, and what you do in that situation for me, you're not going to play him at second base because Andres Jimenez is going to be there every single day. If anything, I think Orelvis might be a first baseman down the road. But if you're going to try this thing with him at third base, which, man, I don't know if that's the play, you pick a day where you have a starter on the mound versus a lineup where it looks like not a lot of ground balls are going to go to the left side. Maybe a fly ball pitcher who, if there's going to be some grounders, they're probably going to the right side. And that's not how you want to build a defense, but everyone else in the diamond plays pretty good defense. So the Jays need to chase some offensive upside somewhere. And what Martinez does is hit. It's what he likes to do. It's what he's good at. And at a certain point, they've got to figure out how that works. Now, he did himself no favors with that suspension. That upset a lot of people, and you don't just come back and smile and move past that. But he has more upside than any of those prospects. That group of kind of fringy infielders. They've developed enough guys who can kind of hit. Like they need a guy who can really pop. And if he completely fails, whatever, on to the next guy. But they need some ceiling.
Time now for a mound visit, courtesy of the Baseball Zone. Today, Coach Sean Schaefer explains what he would tell a young baseball player who's looking to turn pro one day.
They need to get into the weight room and work as hard as possible in the weight room. One of the best things that I ever heard when I was playing is, what do you do when nobody's watching? It's not always about, when you jump on a field, you're in a championship game, it's easy to perform. But the best players are working their hardest when no one else is around. So, when you're spending your extra time either taking your swings or doing your mobility work, or, getting in the weight room for an extra day when other guys are sitting on the couch or playing video games, right? So how much time and effort are you willing to put in over top of what, the average player's willing to do?
This has been a mound visit courtesy of the Baseball Zone. Now back to the action.
That's enough of spring training talk. Now I want to talk about this book that you've written is coming out in June, just in time for Father's Day, right?
That is right before Father's Day. So I'll be, after annoying people over the next couple of months, I'll have that little round of marketing as well. It's perfect.
So how did that all come about? How were you approached to write this book? And kind of take us through kind of the beginning times of writing the book.
I was approached December of 2023, and I remember it vividly because I'd had loose conversations about a couple of books in the past that I had not done because I was, at one point didn't think I was established enough, and at another point I was just already too stressed with this job. Now that I'm handling that just poorly instead of terribly, I felt like I had room to take it on. But I remember it so clearly because I was in the middle of that Shohei Ohtani mess in Nashville. And where that was, this convention conference center was the strangest place I've ever been. And this 3,000 room mega complex that had its own rivers and restaurants running through it, like just an absolute horror show of a convention center. So my stress and tension was already a little bit high trying to cover this Shohei Ohtani thing. And suddenly in my email, I have an email from a publisher wanting to discuss a book. And I'm thinking, number one, yeah, let's chat. But number two, like, just give me a few days. I'm kind of in the middle of something right here that might eventually help out the book. But signed everything last January. Let's say, God bless my agent who has steered me right and told me when I'm being a little too impatient so far. But we signed everything just before the season began. And at this time last year, I was starting to do the interviews. And that's a long process. There were some, I'll call them headaches along the way. But this time last year, I was starting the writing. Then through April, May, June, beginning more and more of the writing. And then really the truth is that, through July and August, there were a couple of times where I'd take a week off and buy 100 cans of Guinness and just lock myself in the condo and see how much I could write.
So there's a little bit of editing at that point, I bet, that needed to be done with those.
A little bit, just a little bit. But it was something that I wrote all through last season. So I've compared it early this year to kind of like swinging with a weighted bat in the on deck circle. Like now I feel like I'm up and I don't have a book hanging over me to write this year, and I'm getting to work every day. I'm thinking, man, this is all right. I've just got to write a story and hang out, go home. Like I don't have the stress of the book anymore. But it's been a legitimate process for that entire year. And I didn't think it would be that involved. This off season was heavy on edits. First, you have your general edits where you're going through and catching mistakes. Then you have your hard edits where you're going through and saying, okay, there's a comma in this sentence. Is it correct? Yes. On to the next word. Those were the days where I really thought I was going to lose my damn mind. But we are finally completely ready, off to the printer. Nothing happened along the way to sabotage it or require me to rewrite the whole thing. So it's been the greatest joy of my career, man. Honestly, there have been times where I've called it the worst thing to ever happen to me, sure. But overall, it's just it's been fun, man. It made me fall back in love with this. Like it excited me again. It really, really did.
So I should obviously mention the name of the book, The Franchise, Toronto Blue Jays, A Curated History of the Jays. So how much self-editing, how many interviews did you have to do? Take us through kind of the logistics of getting a book out there. And did every interview make it into the book, or did you waste time on some? You said mentioned some headaches. Kind of pull back the curtain a little bit on those things.
Yeah, chasing guys was the tough part. And a lot of them, number one, I was fortunate that I did have some interviews built up because over the years I've covered so many alumni events. And the day I found, nowadays for people listening, I record players just on my iPhone. I just hold up my voice recording app to their face. It's easy. When I started this job, I had a little plastic Sony recorder and I could not find that thing. And I knew that it was a gold mine of old interviews. And I finally found it in a box somewhere. And that saved me because then, for example, if I'm writing a chapter about Joe Carter's home run, I've already talked to him 10 times about it. I don't need to bug him an 11th time about it. So that was able to kind of get me out in front. But then dozens and dozens of interviews with former executives, with alumni, with current players, with people around the team, business and baseball side. And really opened me up to a lot of things I'm not usually exposing myself to. My job most days is just, hey, Vladdy, you homered. How did it feel? Hey, Kevin Gosman, your splitter got more whiffs than usual today. Let's pretend to care about that, And the next day, nobody remembers. But the interviewing process was so incredibly fun for me because it was people telling me stories, often about the best days of their lives. Um, Despite how nervous the existence of this book has made some people, because when you hear a book is being written about your organization or your team, the initial, imagine if I told you guys, hey, I'm writing a book about you, your reaction would say, oh my God, what, like, did you find out the scandal? But so many, the majority, of course, of these stories are positive memories for these guys. And they enjoyed looking back on it. And that was fun as hell for me. And the interviews themselves were such a joy because a lot of these were players who I would have grown up watching, grown up as a fan of when I was younger. And a lot of them predated me completely. So it was fun to go through that. And I'm grateful that I got to be a little picky as well. I've struggled with how to describe the book because when I say it's a history of the team, that sounds really boring. And the entire idea was to not write a boring book. I mentioned a couple of times in the intro and then midway through that, like, listen, this isn't every story about the Blue Jays. It's just not. This would be a volume of encyclopedias if it was. But these are some stories that I really like and that I think are worth telling. No, you're not going to have every single thing and every single player, but I'm not trying to write the whole history. I'm just trying to add to it. This team's been around a lot longer than I have. And being able to get into some of those things in a longer form way was just real fun. It was it completely changed how I interact with even my job now, honestly.
Did you have do you have a favorite interview that you did? And can you share a little bit about what made it so memorable?
Man, there'd be a couple. One would be Carlos Delgado because growing up, Delgado was my guy. And I said this in the intro of the book. It's actually probably the first thing people will read is that when I was growing up in the 90s in Nova Scotia, games would start at 8:30 Atlantic time. So I was already kind of flirting with when I should be in bed when I was, 5, 6, 8, 9, whatever. So Carlos Delgado would always be my ticket to watching the second inning because if they went down 1, 2, 3, I'd say, okay, like let me watch some bum pitch. I didn't like pitching back then. I liked hitters. I was a Delgado guy and a Mo Vaughn guy on the Red Sox. So I would say, come on, let me stay up one more inning, watch the Blue Jays, watch Delgado hit in the bottom half. And of course, I've done stuff with Delgado over the years, just normal coverage, but speaking to him for the book was really special. Speaking not just about his career, but Hall of Fame candidacy, some of these social issues he's been involved with throughout his career that he believes in. He's just an incredibly impressive guy to talk to. And that's one of those that did mean a lot to me. There were others that were I think even closer to my media side, sitting down with Buck Martinez. The final chapter in the book is Buck Martinez. And writing that chapter meant the world to me. It might be the most meaningful chapter to me in the book, because Buck is someone who's come to mean a lot to me personally. As someone young coming in on the beat, I always judge people by how they treat young people coming in, like media wise, because a lot of people suck with it, to be honest with you. Buck has always been fantastic and he's become a great friend, but being able to tell the story of his career and all of the bounces that got him to come here. And I mean, Buck lets it fly now too. Like there's some great Buck quotes in there that I can't even fully repeat on a podcast, I don't think. But just of when he initially learned of being traded to Toronto, just like, are you serious? They traded me to the Blue Jays, and now look at him, right? It's just incredible to sit back and talk through not just his career, but also what he's been through in recent years, through his cancer diagnosis, coming back to the booth and what that's meant to him. We sat down and did an interview for, God, an hour and a half, it must have been one day. And till the day I'm out of this industry, that'll be one of my favorite interviews I ever do. It's really special to hear, to talk to someone who has felt the love that's out there for them while they're still here to feel it, type of deal. I often use this example, but like I grew up a minister's boy, right? So it's that's something my dad would always talk about. A lot of people show up at the end, but they don't tell people while they're still here, sort of deal. So talking to Buck about his experience, like connecting with people through his diagnosis, coming back to the booth that night, what that's meant to him, like that'll stick with me forever, man. That was an incredible conversation. But I think that's what excited me about the book too. There was a little more humanity to it. I couldn't turn every story into something soft and dramatic, but there was something a little more outside of just baseball involved with it, which really meant a lot to me.
How nostalgic was this for you? Because you mentioned Delgado, and now I'm thinking back of, I remember Labatt Blue Jays baseball was on TSN and CBC. I can hear the intro music. That's when you fell in love with the game. You talked about being a fan growing up. So how do you try to connect that and kind of trigger that in readers in this book?
That's been a huge struggle for me in this job, honestly. And I haven't done well with it at times. Like back when I started on the Blue Jays beat in 2017. Now, those first few years, part of it was that I was just trying to get a job and I was broke and angry, I'm sure. But I struggled with that relationship to baseball itself because suddenly it was work and I didn't have a healthy way to interact with it. It's strange for some of my friends to hear that, but like, I don't care who wins. I don't. I care that there's a good story. And if it's sub 3 hours, cool. I'm down with that. But I care about a good story. Because I know that a win or a loss, it's not going to tilt the direction of the world. It's okay. But I think I became a little too bitter, a little too quickly, young in my career. Richard Griffin, who I sit next to in the press box, often jokes that I'm the oldest young man he's ever worked next to. But I was off on that. Like my aim was off, and I wasn't interacting with baseball itself. I got a little too far away from loving baseball. I mistook you can't cheer for a team with you can't love the game anymore. And that dragged me down for a couple years, to be honest. I let the stress of this job pile up on me quite a bit. And I've had to work on that the last couple years. And then this book was just like this explosion for me of like, I'm back in, And it's been so fun. Like, I feel so completely back in on it. And it's that relationship is important for me to have because if I don't give a damn, then it's giving permission for no one else to give a damn. If I'm writing a story that I'm not passionate about, who cares? Just delete it.
No, that's very honest because and you know this, and obviously you wrote a book but not to make your head too big, but you're such a good storyteller. So it's really interesting to hear you kind of went through that early in your career and now you wrote a book and it kind of reignited that. Not that it wasn't before, but kind of really reignited that passion.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it was there and I it's not like I hated baseball, but I say to, my friends, if they are a grade six math teacher or they are an accountant, do you go home and do math? Do you go home and do your taxes? No. I kind of lost that real active love for baseball outside of work. And that was a product of, of many other things, of just being stressed, of dealing with anxiety. But it's completely changed this job for me, kind of coming out of the book. Last year, I mean, it nearly killed me writing the book on top of my job, which I thought was smart. Maybe it wasn't. But coming back into camp, even this spring, it's helping me do things a lot differently now. And it's helping me be more active with that because I don't really like how baseball's covered. I just don't. Um,
How so?
there are days, carefully, there are days when I think, it's that people aren't covering actual baseball enough anymore and stories that go into it. It's important to write the analytic stories, the stories about process, the story about how a guy holds his splitter, the stories about prospects. These are all very important, but you can't hide behind only them. I think that there's some days I say I would just love to rip the Wi-Fi out of a press box and everybody has to watch the game and write a story about what happened, why people care, and why it mattered to the people who played the game. And I know that this is me going a few feet down the path of being the grumpy old man who's yelling about numbers and calculators or something, but it's I think that baseball coverage has gotten a little too disconnected from the basics and those fundamental values of what happened, why should you care, and how did people feel who were involved with it. Those are always the best questions that I hear people ask, and it's the best insight you hear from players is how did you feel? Why did you do that? What made you do that? If you were younger, would you have done it the same way, or have you grown into that, etc.? That's what interests me. And again, yes, there's 100% time for all of those other stories, but I think that a lot of coverage drifts into those as the core instead of stories as the core. And I mean, and again, this is me being too artsy fartsy with my fine arts degree coming in and trying to write stories about baseball. I know it might not be for everyone, but I just really am feeling more active in that now, and I want to tell stories. Maybe ones that's I mean, God, this season, 162 games. I'm going to write 152 stories that no one's going to care about or remember the next day. That's how this job works. But I'd like to find a few more along the way that kind of stick.
Yeah, no, I think one of the best things I ever heard was about Bob Elliott, and they said about him when everybody else was walking out, he was walking in. Kind of getting those stories that nobody else was getting, and that always sticks with me
Exactly.
when you're trying to tell stories of people that are
Yep.
playing the game. How much of the Otani saga is in this book, and is there any little tidbit you can give us as a bit of a teaser as to maybe something that surprised you?
All of it. That's going to be a chapter that's it's funny. This is actually a good example of the kind of poker game of writing a book. Um, I wrote the Otani chapter on an airplane over a few little plastic cup bourbons in like May of last year. Like I just got motivated one day on a flight and I was like the right mix of like angry and tired. So I wrote the Otani chapter. And it was funny because one of the little nuggets that isn't really meaningful, but I knew people would latch onto it, was the story about Otani's dog running out in the Canadian dog jacket that the Blue Jays had gotten for him. And I think it was Ken Rosenthal a few weeks back had that in a story. I think it was Ken. I want to make sure I'm sourcing that right. But that was one of those little things of like, in last May, where I'm thinking, I've got this little nugget. Let's see if I can get it all the way to the book, And it's thankfully nothing else has really gotten picked off. So you'll read that in there, but the Otani story was definitely one of my favorite few to write. I'm hopeful that one good thing about this book is that people can just bounce around and read whatever chapter you want. It's not you don't need to read it like a novel. And I think Otani is one that I'll point people towards because I get into what actually happened in terms of his tour, how that tour went, what they did, what they talked about, how he got to and from. what his locker looked like in the Blue Jays clubhouse, even. But also what it was like to cover that. I kind of hesitated with being a little too inside media in the book sometimes, but I also realized that again, the Jays beat is shrinking. There's lots of times where it's just me and Sportsnet at games, right? So I think that the experience of being there can be maybe a bit interesting, but the experience of covering that day and that awkward as hell Zoom we had with Ross Atkins, where he would not tell us where he was. And I think I put this in the book. I need to check if I did, but I still remember that Zoom where Ross was refusing to tell us where he was, refusing to even speak in the common Queen's English. I could barely understand how he was describing where he was. But at one point, the Zoom froze. And I had asked questions off the top and saying, Ross, where are you? And his answer was like, listen, Keegan, I'm so happy that Zoom allowed us to be together today to make this adjustment. And I was like, dude, what are you talking about? Then the Zoom froze, and it was only me and him on the Zoom together. Ross was trying to make small talk. It was just bad.
It was
But
just wait, it froze for everybody else but you and Ross?
for everybody else, because I think a lot of people were trying to get back to their rooms or they were on data instead of hotel Wi-Fi. So the PR folks were trying to get back onto the call and salvage this. I think at one point I took the reins and started pointing out who would get the next question, but that's all to say that I did go pretty inside the media side of all this as well. And God, now that I'm thinking of it, that's one of the rare times where I have pre-written a story. So we published my full story that I had ready for Ohtani signing with the Blue Jays. And there's a couple of, it reads like the wildest dream is true. Shohei Ohtani has joined the Toronto Blue Jays. News broke early Sunday that he has signed a X contract because we thought it was going to happen. So I wrote a story and we decided we'd plug the numbers in when it happened. And I remember that day I emailed the story to myself being like, maybe someday. And at the last minute, we decided to put that in. So I'm sure people will really enjoy that. That really brings back a great memory for everybody.
Yeah, yeah. I think people will be pissed off a little bit reading that story, that
Yeah,
chapter, but
yeah, maybe.
it's a can't miss chapter in the book, I'm sure.
It's a good one. I like that one. I really got to go into some detail on that one. That was fun. That one was a little more like a long version of my job, for example. Like that was a bit more reporting a story. A lot of the other stuff was more telling a story. This one was actually doing some reporting, which I loved. I'm glad not too much of it's gotten blown up over the last year in my face. We'll see how the next couple months go. Who knows? But yeah, that one was fun to write, but the whole time just very aware that people might not enjoy it whatsoever. So yeah, welcome to the book.
Wanted to ask you about 2015 and how much of that sort of time, that crazy year it was, is in the book. Because I remember in June of that year, it felt like one more loss and Gibby was going to get fired. And yet, the crazy trade deadline where in the middle of the night they get Tulo and then they get David Price. And it felt like there was a non-zero chance they were going to end with Mike Trout at the end of the day, the way things were going. So how much of that, quick time of Jay's history is in this book?
Definitely. There's a chapter on that era itself, and then a couple of Bautista chapters and a Josh Donaldson chapter, which will cover a lot of that. And Bautista was great for the book. He still has this like swagger that nobody else can pull off. And it's not even too in your face. It's just very subtle in the way he talks. He'll just casually in the middle of a sentence, he'll be like, well, I was on a pretty good run there for about a decade. And anyways, I'm like, man, only Jose, is talking to Jose even about life around the city. There's a chapter called Famous in a Small Town about how players have dealt with being famous in Toronto. Some of that is stories about, me bumping into players at bars and them getting scared. But some of that is just like great anecdotes from guys like Bautista. And Jose said it felt like he was getting the Michael Jackson treatment when he was in Toronto, which was like, all right, man, like, hell yeah. But Jose was great for the book. Edwin Encarnacion was great for the book. Donaldson got him in there, but man, Gibby was the star of that stuff. Gibby wrote the foreword. He eventually wrote it. At first, he told me to write it and just put his name on it and make him sound smart. But I eventually had to had to convince him. But the Gibby chapter I loved. I had such a good time writing the Gibby chapter because he was there, like he was already well there when I came into the Jays beat, and I was kind of the young, nervous guy in the corner. But now we hit it off over the years, Gibby and I, and that was a fun one to get into. He told some great stories, and I tried to take people inside what it was like being in the office of John Gibbons, which is nothing I will ever experience something like again. I don't think.
Yeah, we had the privilege of having John on this podcast, and what a great interview! He's exactly what he comes across as, just so easy to talk to.
Yeah,
Speaking of that, did you have any issues getting information out of people? I think of people like Ross Atkins and Mark Shapiro and some of the interviews that they do. Did you run into any of that writing this book, and how did you kind of overcome it?
definitely. With a lot of folks, like I mentioned, when they would hear that I'm writing a book, the initial reaction is, "Ooh, okay," and I understand that because if they know me through my usual work, which anyone in baseball who I'm talking to, I guess, would, yeah, some of that's negative. A lot of the times I am writing the Jays lost, this is why it sucked story. And so I think there was a bit of a, not misconception, that's the wrong word, but maybe a hesitance that this book might be a lot of that, like a teardown of this era of Blue Jays baseball. And frankly, I didn't even really get into that because this era isn't over yet. That's for the next book. There's a chapter on Vladdy's 21 season and a chapter on Vladdy's prospect years, which I kind of want to like keep as their own thing. But I couldn't write the hit piece for this era of Blue Jays baseball because if I do that, they would go out and win the World Series this year, and I'd look stupid. And me looking stupid by that example, I guess, is more important than anyone else's happiness. I guess I'm not tracking very well here, but
People would love for you to look stupid on that.
oh yeah, they'd be thrilled. But getting information out of people, absolutely difficult. Sometimes it was made easier by the fact that they knew this was a book coming out in a year and not a story coming out tomorrow. So Otani's a good example. People were not eager to talk to me about that. But it's a game of building blocks. If I run into a wall, that's when I let it slip that I already know something. And if someone doesn't want to tell me something, I'll say, oh, well, I already know that he had pink shoelaces that day. What else can you tell me? It's not a real example. I don't know shoelaces that day, but you chip away.
It's like an interrogation. You basically just say, and then you go, oh, they're not cooperating. It's like, oh, well, what about this photo?
Good cop and bad cop. But I think I learned through this book that there's a lot of ways to tell the same story. You can do that directly with the voice of the person involved. You can do that by going around them and talking to people who knew them or using archival stuff. Like I used a lot of our archival newspaper clippings, archival TV coverage for this book to get a more honest sense of what it was like actually then, without the polish of hindsight. So there's a lot of ways to go at a story. There's always a plan A. I mean, hell yeah. But there were definitely some times where I had to go around that, and getting in touch with guys was challenging. It's recent guys was no problem. Text them, set up a call, boom, easy. But tracking down a lot of certain veterans who maybe do not stay in the spotlight voluntarily can be difficult at times. And that was honestly a moment where I put this in the acknowledgments, I think, but I should say it out loud as well, where a lot of my colleagues were incredibly good to me. Me, Sportsnet, Toronto Star, Toronto Sun, like we're all competing, sure. But it's this kind of bizarro, we work together, but work against each other. Like a beat is a strange thing to describe to people. And I'm still grateful and so thankful to a lot of those folks who, how should I word it? Who witnessed some of the obstacles that some folks were putting in front of me and were helpful with contacts. And that's something I'll forever respect and appreciate. But it's a beat is at its best when everyone can kind of, wink and help each other out every once in a while. And I absolutely had that help 100% and needed it through this book.
I think that's how you get the best coverage, even just day to day. I feel Like you're still, again, you are competing because you're different networks and you're different outlets and whatnot. But when everybody kind of works together in that sense, it's the best case scenario for the end reader, which is the fans.
Absolutely. Like even down in spring training right now, I think now it's just me and Sportsnet here right now. That'll change. I think Toronto Star will come in and out. We'll see what other outlets do, but it's that's something I've changed my thinking of a lot over the years. And I just we can all win. I think like everybody can write it. Like if Shy writes a great story tomorrow, great. That's my friend. I'm happy for him. I can write a great one too on the same day. If BNS beats me on a story tomorrow, cool. It's all in the game. There's 162 more of these things. It's I think everybody wins. Everybody wins when there's good coverage. It's
Yeah,
just that's as simple as it is. I'm in the business of people caring about baseball.
yeah,
That's my
absolutely.
business.
I could sit here and talk about this all day, but my final question, because I don't want you to give away too much, which you haven't. You've given away, I think, just enough for people to be like,
Oh, I
I
like
need,
it.
I
Good.
need to put hands on this thing.
I need to work on being a polished marketer over the next couple of months here. So good.
Well, yeah, that's a discussion for another day. But I guess my last question is, if there's one thing people take away from this book, what do you want it to be?
Hmm. I think particularly right now. I mean, this past week has changed how I'm going to frame the book because people are really pissed off right now. And one thing I've accepted going into this was that the quality of this book isn't going to change sales any. People don't sit in the bookstore and read the whole book, then decide yes or no. This book will sell if people care about the Blue Jays, period. And if the Jays suck and people don't care about them come June 3rd, it won't sell. That's fine. Maybe I'm just coping and preparing myself, but how I look at this book now is that it's a book about why people have loved this team. And that's something I found writing it. Like I completely fell back in love with my job and with baseball writing this book. But I hope that this is either a reminder or some news stories just about why people give a damn about the Blue Jays. The Blue Jays and baseball has completely changed my life. And some of my best friends, some of the most important people in my life are only there because of baseball, of being around it and caring about it. And I'm hopeful that this book can give people something to talk about in that regard. It's not all flowers. It's not all let's clap your hands, look at how great this was. But I hope that the nostalgia has some stick to it. I really hope that this gives some people some good memories that they either have forgotten or want to relive. And it's just that's how I look at it now. And after this Vladdy mess this week, I look at it as a book about why people have given a damn about the Blue Jays. And for some folks that'll land, I hope it does. But yeah, it's been just a wonderful experience. And I hope I hope people enjoy it, God, 1% as much as I have. I've sure read it enough at this point. My Lord,
You
I
know,
am
wherever
ready
comma is
for
in that book.
somebody else. I could probably recite this book at this point. So I'm happy for someone else to take a turn at this point. Goodness.
Yeah, you could act in it. You could put on a Broadway show in it.
Oh, absolutely. I bet you there are a few chapters where I bet you I could get 90% of the words just reciting it at this point. So I could probably tell you where all those damn commas are too, but sounds like they're in the right place now though. I had some good editors. One of my best editors, Buck Martinez. He caught me from looking stupid a couple of times as well. So Buck gave me a couple of good reads since he's been here for every damn thing with this organization. But yeah, we got it cleaned up, and I'm real excited for people to get their hands on this. I'm trying to do a good job I'm trying to do a better job of allowing myself to be excited and kind of lean into that. It hasn't always been my strength at times, but I'm just trying to let this be a fun thing and enjoy the hell out of it.
Yeah, I think you should, and you should be excited about it. And I think you got two sales already in this call here. On
I
this,
love it. We're up to two. The over
there,
was 1.5, so we've already cashed. The publisher's happy.
There you go. So yeah, this has been a great conversation, Keegan. We really enjoyed hearing about the book, and I'm really looking forward to reading it. And thanks for doing this.
I appreciate it so much, guys. Thank you.
These just keep getting better, Jackson. This was such a unique episode, diving into the book that's coming out in June. I feel like Keegan gave us just enough to go to the stand and buy it, but not enough to that we know everything.
Yeah, and it sounds, we're really grateful, obviously, to Keegan for his time. And, it sounds like I really liked when he talked about the process of this, right? And how cathartic it was for him, it sounds like. He talks about his joy of covering the team and how it's sort of reinvigorated by this book. I think that stuff is great. I think fans love to hear that. Fans of the Jays love to hear that, talking about covering this team and that honesty. I think that's refreshing, and this book is just, I think, will also be just tremendous in terms of the stories and Matt, like some modern stuff, right? Like he talked about that's why I asked him about 2015, right? Because there really isn't a lot of inside stuff on those recent times, right? Because it's playing out as it happens. So the fact that we get this book right now, I know he talked about, hey, it's it all depends on how people are interested in the Jays in the moment. But I think like for a lot of Jays fans, like getting this book for your dad, the people that you share memories that he talked about, Delgado, Bautista, whoever, the people you share those memories with, to share this book now with them and be able to talk about it. I think Keegan, that's really what he's done tremendously with this.
I mean, yeah, he took me back in time. Like I mentioned, I can hear the intro music to some of the old Jays broadcasts, and he was talking about Buck Martinez and everything he's been through, and has such a history with the franchise. I was getting chills just listening to him talk about it. So I really can't wait to dive in. I think this is going to be a great sell. And he talks a little bit about if the Jays, aren't doing well, people are mad, people might not buy it. I don't think that's the case at all. I think diehard fans of this franchise can't wait to get their hands on this thing.
You talk about, kind of the coverage of this team and how in recent years it is getting smaller, right? And so to get this book with these fresh stories, and it really sounds, Matt, like he talked about all the interviews he did, finding that recorder, which must have been such an amazing feeling. Sounds like he didn't leave any stone unturned, right? And I think that that's key when you're writing a book like this. I don't have to tell him. And I think that will really come across here. He talked to Gibby, he talked to Buck Martinez. He's not leaving anything sort of out.
Yeah, and I think the big thing is, and why I love reading Keegan's work, is he's such a good storyteller. So to combine all those things, those interviews, those stories from the players of the past and management of the past, and then to add in his ability to tell the story is going to be something really special for Jays fans to read. So we mentioned it earlier. It's the title of the book is The Franchise, Toronto Blue Jays, A Curated History of the Jays. It's coming out in June, and we thank Keegan so much for his time. We're not going anywhere. We got plenty of great guests on the horizon. But until then, take care.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to check out Canadian Baseball Network for extensive and comprehensive coverage of the latest in Canadian baseball. And The Baseball Zone, Canada's leading instructional baseball academy and training home to thousands of MLB pro, college, and youth baseball players.